I don't have a closet. I don't have a light bulb. I don't have my sanity. Hi, I'm Abby. I have a lot of records, and this is Vinyl Monday. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the series where once a week I sit down and just talk about albums that I love. If 20 or honestly 30-minute deep dives aren't your thing, don't worry, I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds, both here on my channel and over on my Instagram. A quick note, this will be my last Vinyl Monday of 2022. I'm taking a week off for the holidays to spend time with family. You might still see an upload from me. It'd be really cool to do a year-end vinyl update, but you also might not get that video. Whatever happens with that, Vinyl Monday will be returning for Season 2, Episode 15 on January 2nd. So normally I make a game out of guessing what album I'm gonna cover next. If you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my community tab. I post the hints over there, silly behind-the-scenes things, as well as polls. A little while back, I found a gap in my schedule for this month, so I let you guys vote on what 2 albums would fill those spots. Last week was the first album from that poll, Odyssey and Oracle by the Zombies, and this week is the second one. You picked Led Zeppelin 1. This will also be my last Zeppelin episode for a while, until March. That's a long time for me, but it's not really a long time for you guys, seeing as I post on Mondays, and there are only 4 of those a month. But you know what? I'm happy to be ending this year with a Zeppelin episode. There's a lot to talk about with this record, so let's end this year with a bang! And let's take the plastic off! This is my first copy of Zeppelin 1. I bought this back when In the Moment Records was still in Brattleboro, Vermont. I think they've moved somewhere else off the highway now, and I really want to go back because they've got some cool stuff in that store. If you're looking for really clean albums and some obscure stuff, and Vermont's not too much of a haul for you, check it out. This is a really great copy, and I know I'm all about, actually playing the records you collect, but I felt bad playing this one. I paid a hefty chunk of change for it, and I wanted to keep it nice. I know it's me going against my own principles, but hey, we're all allowed to be traitors sometimes. I was looking for a player copy. I lost it. And here it is. If you've seen my Almost Famous episode, then you'll know how this copy got into my hands. If not, I'll give you kind of the Spark Notes version. The patron saint of this channel, as I call him, Dan, he's the reason that I listen to a lot of the music that I do, and that is because I picked up his entire record collection from him back when I was in college. Or, well, I thought it was the whole collection. For years, I thought it was the whole thing. A while back, Dan saw my Layla video and my Kick Out the Jams video, and he liked what I was doing here so much that he gave me the last 3 albums in his collection. It was my 4th copy of Blind Faith, my 1st copy of Jazz Blues Fusion, and this 2nd copy of Zeppelin 1. He was keeping those 3 for himself, but then he gave them to me, which is honestly just amazing. He left a note with them saying that Zeppelin 1 was one of his favorite records, so thanks, Dan. This one's for you. I am not going to be spending very much time talking about the cover art at all, because this is some pretty straightforward packaging. It's not a gatefold, just your front and your back covers, and we have a lot of other things to talk about today. This front cover was designed by George Hardy, and it is a photograph of the Hindenburg disaster, or the crash of the Led Zeppelin. And the back cover was photographed by Chris Dreja, an ex-member of the Yardbirds. In order to understand why Led Zeppelin sounds the way it does, we must first understand the Yardbirds in 1967/1968. Or, as I like to call it, Jimmy Page Has a Plan. Of all the British blues bands, the Yardbirds were the most mercurial. First, you had Eric Clapton serving as guitarist, then Jeff Beck, and then a 23-year-old Jimmy Page joins as the band's bassist. He then switches to guitar when the rest of the band realizes they're working with Jimmy fucking Page. I'm emphasizing Jimmy's age here because 1, all of the guys in these blues groups started really young. 2, it's honestly kind of hard to believe Jimmy was ever truly young. And 3, I'm 23 right now. You're looking at the age of Jimmy Page playing in the Yardbirds. This is Little Games, the Yardbirds album with Jimmy Page on it. It's very psych, it's very Yardbirds, for lack of a better term, and it's very all over the place. I can't spend too much time on this one because I do want to have a full-length Little Games episode at some point. In short, this is a piece from a very transitional time in Yardbirds history, as well as a very transitional period in Jimmy's life. As whacked out as this record is, you do hear the bones of what will become Zeppelin 1 on here. You hear it in violin bows on guitars, and you hear it in a little song called White Summer. The Yardbirds 68 compilation of live recordings from Jimmy's Yardbirds provide even more insight on what this stage of the group actually sounded like. It wasn't very reflective of the Little Games material at all. If there were a Led Zeppelin 0, it'd be Yardbirds 68. The Yardbirds sort of collapse in on themselves in the summer of '68 when founding members Keith Relf and Jim McCarty leave the group, as well as the bassist at the time, Chris Dreja. Due to some legal mumbo-jumbo, it was Jimmy who held the rights to the Yardbirds name, and he was contractually obligated to tour under it one last time. But you see, that's kind of a problem when you don't have a fucking band with which to tour. This presented an interesting opportunity for Jimmy. Instead of joining an established group like the Yardbirds were, he could build his own group from the ground up. Shockingly enough, finding the bassist was the easiest part. Page got his first choice to join, established session player John Paul Jones. Page wanted BJ Wilson of Procol Harum as the drummer, but BJ declined, seeing as he was still with Procol Harum. Not sure what Jimmy thought he was going to do with that, but okay. Finding the singer proved to be a lot more difficult. Page originally wanted Terry Reid, then, if you can believe it, Ozzy Osbourne. This becomes a little easier to believe when you remember that Zeppelin and Sabbath actually jammed together. Somewhere along the string of no's, a 19-year-old Robert Plant came up. Page and Plant met up to jam, and they got on like a house on fire. They quickly discovered they were musical soulmates, which, duh, of course they are. You have a blonde lead singer and a dark-haired guitarist. They just work. Plant recommended the drummer of his former group, John Bonham, and once Page discovered that Bonzo blew every other drummer in Britain out of the fucking water, he was in. As for the name, it spawned from a joke. Keith Moon and John Entwistle were talking with Jimmy Page and I think Robert Plant, and it went something like, a group with the four of us would go over like a lead balloon. Nah, man, a Led Zeppelin. And just like that, the Led Zeppelin was ready for takeoff. Or, actually, the new Yardbirds. They still had that pesky tour to complete. On Led Zeppelin, the album, or as it's colloquially known, Led Zeppelin 1, you have Robert Plant on vocals and harmonica, Jimmy Page on guitar and steel guitar, John Paul Jones on bass and keys, and John Bonham on drums. We have a special guest on this record that I'm gonna try my best to pronounce right, Viram Jasani on tabla for Black Mountainside. This record was produced by Jimmy Page and mixed by his childhood friend, Glyn Johns. Oh my god, I get to mention Glyn Johns again on this channel! Screw the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I will take the Glyn Johns extended recording universe over that any day. Jimmy had a different team of engineers working under him on every album. He did this because of the whole Beatles and George Martin thing. George Martin was getting a lot of credit for the Beatles' sound. He's often referred to as the fifth Beatle, even today. Jimmy didn't want anyone taking credit for Zeppelin's sound but Zeppelin. Well, that's pretty ironic considering the circumstances. So he produced every Zeppelin record. Led Zeppelin 1 was recorded in a few weeks between September and October of 1968. Jimmy and the group's manager, Peter Grant, foot the bill themselves. This was so that Zeppelin would have as much creative control over this record as they possibly could. Apparently, it only took about 36 hours of combined studio and mixing time to get this thing together. Not quite on the level of Black Sabbath slamming their self-titled record together in one day, but considering that these guys were just coming off the new Yardbirds tour, still pretty impressive. I've been waiting for this section of the video. So, being the guitarist girly that I am, I love a good customized guitar. You have Wayne Kramer's Stars and Stripes Strat, Clapton's Fool SG, and one of the stars of this record, Jimmy Page's Dragon Telecaster. The 1959 Fender Telecaster was a thank you gift from Jeff Beck to Jimmy Page for recommending Jeff to join the Yardbirds after Eric Clapton's departure. Jimmy put mirrors on the telly first. This was a popular thing that psych guitarists would do. They'd put mirrors on their guitars so it would flash all the lights from the Liquid Light show, and there'd be like sparkles and glitter and stuff with all their crazy costumes. It was very much as much of a visual show as it was sonic. Then Jimmy took the mirrors off, stripped the finish, and painted the dragon himself. Oh my god, so Jimmy Page did paint. This is more proof to my theory that he painted the cover of Zeppelin 4. Jimmy quite liked dragon motifs in the Zeppelin days, you know, if his dragon suits are any indication. But enough about one of my favorite instruments in rock and roll history. The Led Zeppelin 1 track listing goes as follows. Opening up side 1, you have Good Times, Bad Times, followed by Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, written by Ann Breeden. Next is You Shook Me, a Willie Dixon cover, followed by Dazed and Confused. Side 2 opens up with Your Time Is Gonna Come, followed by Black Mountainside. Then Communication Breakdown. Next is I Can't Quit You Baby, another Willie Dixon cover. And the album closes with How Many More Times. Zeppelin 1 was first released in January of 1969. It wouldn't be released in the UK until March. Jimmy was never crazy about releasing Zeppelin singles. The only US single off this record was Good Times, Bad Times. In the UK, there never were Zeppelin singles. And boy, did this album make waves.
George, do you want to hit some of this Jimmy Page album?
Jimmy Page?
Yeah. Just produced an album with his new group.
Is he the one that was in the Yardbirds?
Yeah.
Critics were very divided on this album upon release. It was either sloppy and derivative, or it was greatness, and there was no in between. Insert Greta Van Fleet joke here. Using my soapbox to say Greta Van Fleet is not a Zeppelin ripoff, and I implore you to fight me on that in the comments. The follow-up to this record came a mere 10 months later in the form of Zeppelin 2. Not a crazy turnaround for recording an album in the 60s, but these two back-to-back, still pretty impressive. In retrospect, Zeppelin 1 has been called the greatest debut album of all time. You know, even if those people are wrong. Oh God, please don't sue me, Robert Fripp. I have a lot to live for. I'm the mother of like 500 children. The following topic has come up in the comments of literally every single Zeppelin video I've posted on this channel. And that's been a lot. What can I say? Zeppelin gets eyeballs on the channel. I have been saving and saving and saving this topic, and the time has finally come. It's time to dissect Led Zeppelin's tricky relationship with the blues. The closing track on this album, How Many More Times, it's written around a Howlin' Wolf tune called How Many More Years. It also interpolates The Hunter by one of my personal favorite blues musicians, Albert King. If it weren't for Zeppelin 1, I probably wouldn't know about Albert King or Willie Dixon. If it weren't for Cream, I wouldn't know about Robert Johnson. And if it weren't for Fleetwood Mac, I wouldn't know about Elmore James. Blues is foundational to rock and roll. Black musicians are foundational to rock and roll. Just like there's lines from The Hunter on How Many More Times, their cover of You Shook Me incorporates some lines from Robert Johnson's Stones in My Passway. Zeppelin's been accused of stealing their interpretation of You Shook Me from Jeff Beck. I chalk this up to Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck having a very similar set of influences. I mean, for Christ's sake, they came from the same group. Of course they're going to sound similar. I also debunked Zeppelin stealing that song in my Zeppelin 4 video. They didn't steal the chord progression. It had been around and consistently used as far back as the 1600s, and oh my god, I never want to talk about that song again. But then you have, like, Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, which isn't outright thievery, as Zeppelin never claimed it as their own. They originally had it credited as traditional, arranged by Jimmy Page. I just had to look on my back cover. But there's no credit to the writer, Ann Breeden. This happens again and again and again on subsequent Zeppelin releases. Zeppelin 4, When the Levee Breaks, the best song on the record, not credited to Memphis Minnie and Kansas Joe. It happens as recently as Physical Graffiti, In My Time of Dying, wasn't properly credited either. There's interpolation / homage, like what happens on You Shook Me and How Many More Times. But then there's indirectly claiming something as your own. That's some sneaky shit. Dazed and Confused is a much more brazen thievery. It's a Jake Holmes song that made its way onto later era Yardbird sets. Okay, so why don't we give this same energy to Jeff Beck? Or, even more relevant to my channel, Eric Clapton. Because Clapton credited the blues artists. Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out, credited to Jimmy Cox. Have You Ever Loved a Woman, credited to Freddie King and Billy Miles. Crossroads, written by Robert Johnson, and it says so on the label of this disc. Clapton never denied that his music followed the blues tradition. He didn't have to steal stuff because, frankly, he was too busy stealing his best friend's wife. And here is where I'm observing something that a lot of people caught up in this argument just aren't observing. There's this unwritten code of respect amongst blues musicians that A, you can interpolate the standards as you see fit as a nod of respect, but B, if you cover the song, you have to cite where it came from. How Many More Times doesn't fall under that cover rule because there's just a few lines of The Hunter thrown in there, kind of as a tip of the hat to Albert King. It's a very clear nod. Same thing with the Dust My Broom riff in Fleetwood Mac's My Heart Beat Like a Hammer. The Dust My Broom riff was Jeremy Spencer's comfort riff, in a way. He did it as a nod to Elmore James. When blues groups like Cream and Jeff Beck covered the songs, they said it was a cover of the song. Zeppelin didn't do that. As much as I love Led Zeppelin, they deserve the shit that they get because they broke the code of respect. You broke bro code, man. So, Going in, Led Zeppelin 1 was my first favorite Zeppelin record back when I was really, really heavy in my Zeppelin phase in college. And it's not a perfect record. There are some rough spots, some really, really rough spots. The transitions between songs are clumsy. You can tell that Jimmy was still figuring it out with pacing and production. This is a kink that they would iron out in the follow-up. The transition from Heartbreaker into She's Just a Woman is flawless. Sure, Robert Plant is a legendary rock and roll vocalist, but his voice got better as time went on. 20-year-old Robert Plant could get a little shouty. Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You is probably the worst offender. And oh my god, the panning, the stereo mix panning on Zeppelin 1 drives me nuts. It's fine on Dazed and Confused, but it's way over the top at the end of How Many More Times. Totally overpowers whatever Bonzo's trying to do. As flawed as this record is, the sound of it is so cool. Echo really is Zeppelin 1's secret weapon. Bonzo's drumming needs that echo in order to sound as big as it does. If you move the mic too close to his kit, you're gonna lose half that sound. Good Times, Bad Times is a perfect opener. Everybody gets a little solo, they get to introduce themselves, and the solos on You Shook Me have made that track one of my favorites on the album. That dialogue between Jimmy and Bonzo is so exciting to listen to. I love a guitarist that bothers to interact with the rest of the band while soloing. The tone of the Dragon Telly was next level cool for 68. I love how Jimmy uses it to his advantage on this record. If Echo is one of the secret weapons of Zeppelin 1, the other is distortion. Dazed and Confused was my first favorite Zeppelin song. I still don't get tired of it. It is bonkers. It's another place where Echo and Reverse Echo are the MVPs. This Dazed and Confused is good, but the one recorded in Paris in 1969 for the deluxe Zeppelin 1 is great. Talk about making an instrument sound like a lightning storm. It was Jimmy Page and Dazed and Confused that made me learn to love guitarists. It also influenced my unfortunate habit of Capricorns. I have such a type, it's pathetic. I was approximately today years old when I realized the opening organ line of Your Time Is Gonna Come is the Dazed and Confused riff. You're welcome, you're never gonna unhear that, and good move, JPJ. I Can't Quit You Babe and How Many More Times is one of the coolest moments in Zeppelin's discography, and I'm tired of pretending it's not. Yes, I do consider these one song. I know they're not, but they just have a really short gap between them on the record, and they flow together really well. They flow because they feel like one song. How Many More Times is such a natural continuation of I Can't Quit You Babe. It's a song where Plant's less mature, shouty vocals actually work. I mean, that ending note, it sounds like he's tearing his vocal cords apart. It's searing, it works. That song is the sum of everything Zeppelin was trying to do with this record. It was the blues and the psych elements left over from the Yardbirds, combined with this new, raw power that Plant and Bonzo were bringing. God, Bonzo was incredible. I know I always say that a band is only as good as their drummer, but I never really listened to drumming until I had a drummer fave. Shout out to Sheridan Riley from Always. It took a while, but now I can truly appreciate the drums on a record. Bonzo was what made Zeppelin a cut above the rest. His fills were not human. Everything Zeppelin would do after this record makes Zeppelin 1 sound like a demo, but its rawness sets it apart from the rest of the Zeppelin discography. It's deceptively simple. Is it the greatest debut album of all time? No. But would any other band in 1969 have eaten their velvet waistcoats to have a debut record as solid as this that manages to hold up until 2022? I think so. My personal favorites are You Shook Me, Dazed and Confused, Your Time Is Gonna Come, and I Can't Quit You Babe / How Many More Times. If you want to keep up with all of my favorites, remember that I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description of all my favorite songs from every Vinyl Monday that I've ever covered, which is a lot. And that's it. That is Zeppelin 1, and that's the last Vinyl Monday of 2022. Thank you all so much for allowing me to be a part of your weekly routine for the past 6 months. It's been an honor and a privilege for all of you to be so receptive about my thoughts on these albums that have been around for like 50, almost 60 years. I love this. Thank you. Anyway, enough about me and my thoughts on Zeppelin 1. What do you think? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about the albums that I love. And if you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday every Monday morning at 11 a.m. except for next week. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys back here for the new year. Bye!